Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Black Minds Matter. As always, we have so much to talk about and so little time to talk. And that is exactly why we continue to have really important conversations around education freedom and for Black people specifically in this country. Today, we are joined by Curtis Valentine, who is the Deputy Director for the Progressive Policy Institute at the University of Maryland. We have the Outreach Director at EdChoice, and Paul Dauphin, who is the Deputy Director for the Louisiana State Chapter of the American Federation for Children. Thank you guys so much for joining, and let's just hop right into it. So let's first start off by talking about, because today we're talking about education and economics. And so why don't you guys go around the horn and tell us what you think the problem is when it comes to school funding and education economics and the mobility for Blacks in America? Emory, let's start with you.
Well, I think one of the problems when you look at school funding, definitely in regards to upward mobility for African American families and students, the money doesn't truly follow the kids to allow families to do what they want to do. When you look at the number of black-led charter schools and the fact that charter schools don't receive 100% of the funding, you look at those families that are actually going to private schools, especially those going to black-led, black-run private schools. Unless there's a voucher in that state, there's no per pupil funding going with that family to that school that they're choosing. So I think that's one thing that stops, a lot of upward mobility, because our students aren't getting the education that they deserve, that they need, and a lot of them aren't truly learning about their history to actually aspire to do better and be greater.
Yeah. Paul?
Thank you, Denisha. I'm going to piggyback on what Emory was saying with the funding that's going to the schools through the students, even when there is a supposed per pupil funding equality happening and the money is supposedly following the child. And this goes for any type of public school, traditional public, charter schools. What has really happened is, because a portion of that funding for the school is based on local property tax, because of economic disparity, because of a low percentage of home ownership among minority families, and then the homes that they do own are of lower value, there's a lower tax base, so there's lower funding in those schools. So that just reverberates through the availability of quality of education. And then I know we'll talk about it later, but even for contracts that minority businesses could go after, that funding is limited.
Yeah.
And that's just one of the problems.
Yeah. Curtis, what about you?
Good morning, Denise, everyone. I did want to make one correction. My project is not actually housed at the University of Maryland while I'm a professor there. The Reinventing America Schools project is at the Progressive Policy Institute in Washington, D.C. Just for that correction. I wore my shirt today, free-ish, since 1865. I think in America, America has given America this artificial sense of freedom that every generation has to reclaim, and gives me the impression that we didn't have the freedom after all that we thought we had. Because if we did, we wouldn't have to reclaim it every generation. And right now, you're seeing outside your window, or in this case, on your computer, a sense of freedoms that I think we thought we had, but realized once you try to exercise them and their challenge, that you realize, we didn't have them after all. When it comes to education, I think, generation after generation has proven that if given the power of self-determination and the resources, that we could excel in spite of. Just finished a book on the creation of the United Negro College Fund last night, and just the history of HBCUs and Black-led colleges, which are both private and public. And just the idea that every generation has to reestablish the purpose of whether HBCUs, institutions, created specifically for African Americans, led by African Americans, are necessary. And the idea of money following the child and education money staying within the community is historical in this country. But every generation is sort of asked to forget the past and relitigate things that have happened already, and we thought we've won. And so you have people like Emory, who is in many ways a part of a tradition of education advocates who have to reestablish every generation that we can do it, that it's our money, that the freedom that we thought we had were always there are ours. But it really takes others to join forces with Emory and Paul and yourself to stand up and say our freedom is not conditional and it's not limited in any way, and it's especially important as relates to public education.
Yeah, and so when we were talking, we were having a really exhaustive conversation, and because we spend so much, trillions of dollars in America on education, and it's pretty astonishing when you think about like where all that money is going. And Curtis, you brought up a good point about who's paying for the toilet paper, like who has those contracts, like you teed up, Paul, who has those contracts within the education, which is in supply something as simple as toilet paper.
Well, I mean, I'll start. I think for those, I'm in addition to being with, professor and working at a policy think tank, I'm also a member of my school board where I live. And this came up in a previous conversation around just what I call the economy of education and just how public education has built the Black middle class, not only in preparing them for college and for certain careers, but in many ways allowing African Americans to become part of the actual nuts and bolts of creating a school, and getting a school running. My family are co-founders of a school in Southern Virginia called a Rosenwald School. In a recent discussion with the author of probably the most respected book on Rosenwald, she was asked, what is a 2020 or 21st century version of Rosenwald School? And she said a charter school. And she is not a charter school advocate. And she is, and so if I just sort of use that terminology that my great grandparents opened a charter school, my great uncle, the son, created a bus company that allowed him to raise a family of 10 and send 6 of them to college. And so there traditionally have been African Americans who have been able to create schools, but also benefit from the economy of those schools, which is the bus contracts, the building contracts, the curriculum contracts, all the different things that school systems dole out in resources every year.
Curtis.
Yes. Emory and Paul, are you all okay, or is it just Denise?
Yeah, we're okay.
Yeah, we're here.
Denise is having a problem on her end. All of our connections are bright and clear and unfailing, and Denise is frozen.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. I will stop. Maybe she can freeze the video. Yeah,
I think Denise may have to make sure she's got a good connection. I know she just moved to Florida.
Yeah. And she can edit this out. I was rolling, man. I was rolling.
We'll take it. We'll
say it again.
Take it at the Rosenwald School. How's that?
What I say? Oh yeah. Hold on. Oh man, hold up.
Your family. Start with your family. Yeah. We'll be in good shape.
Freestyling. Hold on. You're gonna freestyle. Hold on. What'd you say, bro? I was freestyling, man. That's what I just said. Are you okay, Denisha?
But you look frozen.
You're still frozen. It seems like we're the ones who are. I mean,
I think we got
a hurricane coming your way.
Is it? This move. seems okay. Oh, it seems like it's better. Is that better for now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's edit all that out.
Okay, I'm sorry, Kurt. I know, yeah. Just okay.
So I'll
go again.
I'll go back and just say, I think it's important that we talk about the economy of education and understanding that schools of color, particularly schools of African Americans, many built the Black middle class. And we talk about that, we kind of limit it to preparing African Americans for college and for careers, but we don't talk about just the income that goes into creating a school, sustaining a school, hiring teachers, the bus contracts, and the like. And so my family are a family of education school founders. We founded a school called the Rosenwald School, which is a series of schools of 5,000 throughout the South, from Texas all the way up to Maryland. My great grandfathers, Beverly and Martha Valentine, helped found that school, but my great uncle Willie, the son of Beverly and Martha, created a bus contract. Started a bus company that eventually helped him raise 10 kids and send 6 to college. There's similar stories about the past, but also to the present, where you have African Americans who have become part of the running of very large school systems. My school system in Maryland is a $2.7 billion with a B contract. And so there's money going in and out of the door. But the question is always how much of that money is staying within the community and how much of that money is in the hands of African Americans.
Yeah, and oftentimes, because we all are in the same train of thought with promoting education freedom. Like, we want for kids to get the funding to go to the school that meets their needs, abilities, and interests. And most of the time, our conversation is surrounded by making sure that kids receive the monies to go to a private school, receive the monies to go to a charter school. But the conversation that we're having today is a little bit different, because there's so much money within the public education system that we can use to liberate Black people and their businesses and etc. Paul, because we talk about it quite often with, this isn't just about private school choice. Like, this is bigger than that. And how can the public, get on board with education freedom based on this topic of economics with just the monies in the public education system?
Yeah, I think the people in the public who are only looking at this, a lot of people that I think should be supporting education freedom get wrapped around things like taking money away from public schools, for example. Like, it's taking money away from them when in reality it's money they never had. But just to give you an example of the money that's out there, and Curtis, you talked about the bus company here in New Orleans, where we have a all charter school system, public school system. Transportation is not handled district wide anymore. So right now, about $30 million is spent on transporting students in New Orleans, which is a huge part of the school budget. And thankfully, many of those transportation companies are African American owned, or at least African American operated. So, that's a great example of the opportunities that are out there, but it just spreads out. I'll give an example from my experience. Before I was with AFC, I was doing public relations through my own firm. And that's actually how I got pulled into the ed reform movement, is when they were starting the first charters in New Orleans, they needed a communications company to help get the word out and really do some grassroots work with parents to get them on board. And that's how I came on board and ended up eventually doing public relations communications for a network of 4 charter schools. It was not only doing their communications, ended up creating the website for these schools. And where the power happens is I'm in the door. I'm an African American. I know, and Denisha will, we've already joked about it. Sometimes people will see me on this podcast and go, why is this guy talking about Black stuff? But I'm an African American, and when I decided to go to AFC and leaving that contract behind, I was able to recommend to the charter board that that they hire another African American firm that to take over that contract, and that's exactly what they did. But I think the other thing that people have to do when they look at this education sector and how it's evolving is they need to mine the information and the flow of information on where these contracts exist. Well, how do I get in? How do I bid on this? Are these or because not all these contracts are going to be up for public bid. You know, the one that I had was not public bid, it was relationships. So you've got to start making relationships with these school leaders. You have to and you have to keep your eye on what's up for bid, because the toilet paper contract, the bus contract, those will be bid items. But other smaller contracts, which are what we call in Louisiana that don't have to be bid out, professional service contracts, those can run cumulatively into the millions, and they're out there, and they're not going to be on a public bid list. So, you know, the opportunities, you know, are there.
It's funny. I mean, I'll just say the irony is that when it comes to a lot of the competition around scholarships for private schools and quote unquote vouchers and the like, the public response is often, how do we ensure that the money is being the way it's supposed to, you know, being used the way it's supposed to be used, accountability to non-public entities, which is a valid question. And I think that has to be something that goes both ways. Obviously, as a public school system, you have to have the public trust. You have to understand that the public believe that everyone has an opportunity, that it's not conditional on anything like that. But I think oftentimes, and this is happening even now with regards to the charter network, there's these conditions that are put on one set of schools and not on the others. And I think it's just important that, you know, there's a universal understanding, because when it comes to parents, and, you know, I work a lot more with parents than anybody else. Parents don't really care what you call it. They don't. I mean, and in some instances, you know, places like DC, you know, you have parents who have children in public schools, in charter schools. They may have a parent of a child who's on a scholarship at a private school, and all those three kids are coming home, and she's sending them off to three different schools, and the names of the schools may not have charter in them, may not have private in them. It's just sort of this elementary, this middle, and this high school. And I don't think that mother is sitting down at the beginning of the day choosing, you know, schools based on politics, based on who's elected this or that. I think she's just trying to make the best decision. But when we say, you know, her middle child school is going to be, you know, measured this way, then this child's school is going to be measured this way, and her oldest child's school is going to be measured that way. For her, she really can't get her head around it. And so I think we kind of put ourselves in the shoes of sort of everyday people, and get our head out of the sky, and these bureaucrats who sort of try to use, you know, oversight as a penalty in some ways, because I think we all can see it, and we know that it's hurting children, and parents can see through it too.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys? Oh, go ahead, Emory.
So I wanted to go back to something that Curtis brought up when he was, you know, talking about Rosenwald schools and the history of HBCUs. You know, just imagine, I grew up in Albany, Georgia, which Albany State University is located there. I took one class at Albany State, but I still look at Albany State homecoming as my homecoming because of that rich connection that our community had to that HBCU. Those are the type of connections we need to build with our Black-led charter schools and private schools. We all know the economic impact that HBCUs have in the community. Black-led charter and private schools can have those same impacts because, again, like, you know, Paul and Curtis have pointed out, we're directly in charge of those contracts. You know, we're directly in charge of who gets them, who we work with, who we partner with, versus, like Paul said, when you look at some of these deals that the big districts do, some of those you can bid on, some of them you can't, and a lot of them are based on relationships. And if you don't know how to navigate that system, a lot of times our Black contractors get left out. But if I was starting the school, I'm the school leader, I know that Paul has a background in PR. I can go directly to Paul and hire him. I know that Curtis, family may have a couple companies that can help us out. I can go directly and hire them. That's the true economic impact that Black-led, Black-run charters and private schools can have directly for our communities.
And Emory,
in the country.
I'm sorry, but Emory, I think that's the Black Wall Street that we talk about. And we talk about, with Tulsa and this sort of, there's a reimagining of what the world could look like if African Americans were truly in control. We have these sort of, Black Tuesday, the Black Friday, Black from a Black business today. We never say enroll your kid in a Black school today, right? We can put a little bit of money in a Black bank, go buy a Black fish sandwich. I love fish sandwiches. I'm not trying to be pejorative. Go buy, go use a Black caterer to buy, a cake. I love it.
Yeah,
but no one says
free.
Yeah, do it, man. But no one says enroll your child in a Black school today. Now,
Curtis, I'm going to throw out a question
Paul,
to you.
Let me just say one question, Paul, before you do that.
Okay.
If I did do that, the first question would be, Curtis, where are all the Black schools you talk? What Black school are you talking about? Right.
That's my question.
And the second question would be, well, Curtis, how am I supposed to pay for that? And so this is the conversation that we have to have. Like, all right, so Emory Edwards is the Emory Edwards Academy for boys in science and technology. Kids are learning calculus in 4th grade. Kurt, I found a school, Kurt, Black school, brother's cool. Georgia State alum. Albany, Georgia. I love it. But how the hell am I pay for this thing, Kurt? You said support Black money. But I'm paying taxes. And so I think these are things that, we could talk about it, but again, put ourselves in the shoes of people who are saying, what happens next? But I'm sorry, Paul, what were you going to say?
Yeah, well, that, you said, put your child in a Black school. What's, I guess in this example, what's your definition of a Black school? Is it a school that is quote unquote owned by Blacks? Is it a school that is at least, managed by Blacks? In the case of a charter, that a Black organization has the charter. What's the definition? So if you ask that question in New Orleans, what would that be, or in your community?
That's a great question, because we talk about Black-led schools, and we all know that some institutions will put a Black person out in front, but in many ways they're an employee like anybody else and can be removed rather quickly. But who has the fiduciary responsibility in many ways? That could be the board, but in some instances, there's a third party, a foundation, or something like that. With a Black-led private school, clearly it's going to be the person who's out front, but also those who have invested in him or her to create that school. But my thing is, whose wealth is where is the wealth going? That's and that's sort of that's also a mentioned question with the question. So where is the wealth going and the profit going? So most instances, obviously, nonprofits. These charters are going to be nonprofits, but there's still resources that are going to go back to expand, to grow. Obviously, there's certain salaries that they're going to switch. And I've never been someone who really kind of poked holes at salaries of charter school leaders, because I just know how much time goes into running a school. Similarly, when it comes to a private school, my mom ran private daycares and preschools for I don't know how many years. We were not rich. We were not balling. But what that allows you to do is really create a certain class. You're not going to be a millionaire opening up private schools. You're not going to be a millionaire opening up charter schools. I don't care who you are. But you can create a living, and you can create, to Emory's point, an economy around the people who you believe, invest in that community.
We're in a conversation nationally about community policing and how police should be of the communities that they serve. When we're talking about education and the money's going into schooling and the contracts being given to certain people, do you think that's an appropriate train of thought too when it comes to the education system? Like, people who are getting the monies to serve this community should have a contract to serve the community, so that they should be of the community that they're serving.
Definitely, I think that's an important piece. Even when you look at just the teaching workforce, we talk about a lot. You have suburban teachers that drive into the inner city, teach those inner city schools, and they go home, and they're not able to connect with those students and understand what they deal with every day. I actually saw that here with a community center in the school that we were working with. There were several kids in that immediate neighborhood that were dealing with a lot of different things, from gun violence to domestic violence in the household. And again, they had teachers that were not from that neighborhood, were not from that direct community, would drive in and wouldn't understand why, LaShawn got attitude today. Well, if you was in a community, you would know that, LaShawn's uncle got, killed in the drive-by last night, or, this happened in that household. So I think there's definitely this connection of, teachers and contractors, everybody that's involved with that school, having a direct relationship to the community.
Denisha, I want to make a confession, and I will say I lied to you earlier. I said that Rosenwald helped build 5,000 schools. They were not 5,000 schools. A number of those, he helped build 5,000 buildings. A number of those buildings were teachers' quarters, homes for teachers that were literally right next door to the school. So Denisha becomes a graduate of Florida A&M or from Bethune-Cookman, and you go to Albany, Georgia, to teach at the local school in the village, in the community that Edwards family's in. They say, I don't know anybody in Albany, Georgia. I want to come teach. So we're going to build you a house too. And you're going to understand everything about the Edwards family and the Dauphin family, the Valentine family, all the, you'll go to church with them. You're going to shop at the same stores as them. And you are going to live with them because you understand. And when you walk into the classroom, when you go to church, this is the accountability piece. When you live in the community, accountability is way different. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole different conversation when it comes to accountability. Think about, again, this is historical. If anyone has been to Atlanta, Georgia, you've been to the King Center. Oh, you know what? If you walk down half a block, you have Ebenezer Baptist Church. On the other block, you have the King family. Hold up. The King family's house right here. The church, the house and the church on the same block. Yes, sir.
Oh, that's like historically in the South, your church leaders, the church owned the house next door to the church, so they could ensure that whatever pastor we brought in was tied to that community.
The parsonage, which was owned by the church.
Yep.
We have itinerant pastors who come and go. We have teachers who are itinerant in a traditional sense. They come and go, and they don't live in the community. And there's no knock on Teach for America or anyone else, but a lot of Teach for America volunteers, particularly in my school district, they teach in Maryland, but they live in Washington D.C. They live down in very bustling parts of the community where they're around other similar age young people. They want to have a life, which I totally understand. But that goes against a lot of the history of understanding. Again, to Emory's point, it's easy to understand and empathize with a student when he talks about being hungry, when you understand that you live in the same food desert that he or she lives in, that you understand how long it took. When I finished Morehouse, I went to South Africa and was a member of the Peace Corps. And I lived in my community and I taught in 3 schools, but I would walk past students on their way to the river to get water while I was going to school. And they would come to school an hour later, but I saw them when they walked in over the morning going down to the river with a bucket on their head. I knew that. If I lived in the city and came in and said, well, Denisha, why are you late to school? And they're not going to answer because it's very different to society, but she's going to put her head down and be like, I'm sorry for being late, not versus, Denisha, I'm glad you made it to school today at all. I so appreciate the determination you made to go to the river, get the water, come back, and then still walk to school, because I don't know if I could have done it. It's a whole different conversation when you do that. And it's whole level of accountability when you have people who are literally invested in the community. Because if you can come and go, and I tell people all the time, people come into this space and in my organization around me, and they'll come and say, well, Kurt, I think I'm deciding to go do this now. Like, you gonna do something totally different? Like, what do you want? Like, you gonna go sell insurance or something? I can't do that if I wanted to. I couldn't leave this work, even if I did go sell insurance. I got babies, I got cousins, I got community. I can walk up the street. I can't go to the store because I live in a community like this. We can't turn it off and on. And so, accountability for us is high.
I might be sticking my foot in my mouth, but I don't necessarily agree with that train of thought. And this is why. I grew up in that type of community. I grew up in poverty in a war zone. I'm just going to call it that. I grew up in a war zone and I got out. And when people come to this country, they immigrate from war-torn countries. They see their family members dying in the streets and they come to America. We say, oh my gosh, you got out. Like, you survived. And now you're able to make a better living for yourself and help. But we don't send them back to the country that they just came from. And but we in America, it seems like, oh, if you are not still living in a war-torn neighborhood, then you're not qualified to be in the classroom or in. I'm not saying that you don't have the knowledge of what's going on in these neighborhoods. That's different. But I don't think you have to live in the neighborhood or where you're trying to help.
Well, I think the expectation is that let's just use you as an example, Denisha, since you said you were putting your foot in your mouth. That the expectation is that when Denisha goes back to Jacksonville, she's going to go back and help improve her community. And I mean, I'm guilty of that too. My hometown of Opelousas is not that great, and I've never had a desire to go back and live there. So I think I've lived with what you're talking about, but those are tough individual decisions. But I again agree with Curtis that communities need people to go back to it and or stay in it if possible. And I actually look at something that brings a lot of ed reformers into the picture. And I'm talking about white ed reformers in the business community. They will say, I'm for ed reform and I want to improve schools in Black communities because I believe in workforce development. I want to, we need to better educate students so that they can get jobs and we can have a stronger workforce. But my question always is, what are you making us, quote unquote, better for the jobs that you think we should do as opposed to the best jobs for our lives? And, I think that's just one of those underlying things that we always have to keep our eye on. And I know some of you have listened to the Nice White Parents podcast, and that's kind of in the vein where that comes from.
Yeah, Paul, you hit on a really important point because that's something that we always have to watch for, especially in your smaller communities, because essentially what they're saying is, we believe in workforce development, so we want to make sure that the community is able to get a job at the local plants that we have versus being able to get an education that can get them out of the city if they want to leave out of the city.
Yeah. Or own the plant.
Yeah, or own the plant. And Denisha, to a point that you brought up, we have a lot of immigrants that come here, come from war-torn areas, but they also send a lot of their resources back. So it's not just about you going back there yourself, but how can you send resources back, whether it's having conversations with people that you're still connected to, providing them access to ideas that you have. Like, I admit, I haven't been back to Albany in probably 15 plus years, but last year I was able to bring a couple of my friends that are educators to one of the trainings that we hosted with EdChoice, and totally changed how he looked at education. And I'm able, through social media and the technology we have now, to still engage in conversations with them to say, hey, I know this is the system that we grew up in, and honestly, it hasn't changed that much. I think my high school probably was a C-rated high school when I graduated. It's a D-rated school now. But how do you get people to progress? It's by having those conversations and helping them understand the things that we understand now that they're not talking about.
And I would say I think Emory made an excellent point. For the greater part of my 30s, I worked around the world, developing countries: Bosnia, El Salvador, Kenya, Zambia, and I worked with nationals. When I came back in the U.S., I worked with them. Most of them, who at least came directly, have ambitions of going home. Almost all of them, unless you were born here, most of them have ambitions of going home one day and preparing and getting education and building a bank, a hospital, a school there, whether it be directly or indirectly. And so I think the communities of people from around the world still do that. The question is why we feel that our communities don't have similar value. And here's an example. I'll give 2 examples. One right now, Washington, D.C., the communities you talk about, Southeast D.C., Anacostia, for a long time, people told us that those communities were not worth much, and then we believed them. And then in the middle of the night, we turn around and all of a sudden they start gentrifying the communities, and now the value's going up. And you're like, what happened? You told me it wasn't worth nothing. And now these communities that we have, quote unquote, escaped are now of value. And it's just hashtag don't sell grandmama's house because they come from grandmama's house. Secondly, the community I talk about where my Rosenwald School, which is about 3 hours south of Maryland, DC, excuse me, in Southern Virginia. My dad bought, before he passed away, built a home there. And he talked about how there's a lake called Lake Gaston. And a generation ago, Black people owned all the land on that lake. And slowly but surely, land was bought up, people passed away and then claimed the land. And now it is almost entirely white. And now there are $1 million homes on it and boats hanging. And everything that you think that we wanted for ourselves a generation ago are there now. And you're right, a lot of people don't go back and they never came back. But when you do go back and you realize, wow, there were people up here developing my community because maybe they saw more value in it, that's something I think we'll all have to reckon with because the greatest feat of many of those who of our detractors were getting us to believe that where we came from, which is, I believe, in many ways who we are, was of no value to us and to the world. When in fact they were preparing to take the land in the first place. Yeah,
I think you bring up a interesting point because we did a video talking about Wakanda, and it's so sad now. We got this movie Black Panther, and it really stretched us to dream beyond what we saw, beyond what we see in our war-torn, I'm just going to continue with that analogy, neighborhoods, and that there is treasure, like you're talking about, within the ground, and we don't oftentimes see that. And during the episode, we talked about, the barbershop, that guy who's been there all the time, the cook, the nail salon that's right there in the community, and why not give them monies, to do some business type of lessons in the school system, give them that contract to teach business education to students because they've been doing it for so long. But we'll go to a Wells Fargo and say, okay, come to our school and teach business. But in reality, that barbershop and that nail salon that's right down the street, they probably have a better understanding of the different struggles and the challenges that it's going to take for the kids in the neighborhood to start some of these businesses. And I thought that was very interesting. But talking about Wakanda, because we talked about that a little bit, let's talk about what the ideal school system, when it comes to all these things that's wrapped around it, who gets the money, from the school lunch contract to the school bus. I'm trying to think of some other things that are around it. Of course, we talked about teachers.
I mean, definitely now when you look at
in your
you still have janitorial contracts, and especially when you look at where we are now with looking at putting kids back in the school buildings, being able to make sure that our classrooms are clean and sanitized, so COVID-19 isn't a main issue that we'll have to worry about. But that's a huge contract, which a lot of times you will walk in the building and you'll see people that look like us working, but they don't always are the ones that actually own that contract. And before we get too deep, I want to kind of go back to something that you just said about how we get the local neighborhood barbershops and beauty salons, how we get them involved, with enlightening our kids and pushing our kids from an education standpoint. The barbershop that I grew up in, my barber actually knew when it was time for report cards to come out. So every 6 weeks, I went and got my haircut every week and a half. When it was time for report cards to come out, before I even sat in that chair, how your grades are, son? What we got going on? It's easier to build those relationships when you are a single site or a small school organization network versus when you look at from a district standpoint. From a district, there's a lot of bureaucracy. So if a principal wanted to build relationships to where you had, some connection to your local barbershop, your local church, your local beauty salon, he has to run that information all the way up to the district office and it has to come back down. Versus if he's the end all be all, it's easy for him to set that relationship up. I can remember some conversations we had here, just looking at some of the youth violence that was happening in our city a couple years ago, and there were a lot of community centers that were saying, "Hey, how can we start like some basketball programs? How can we get kids off the street? We have this neighborhood school, I'll say quote unquote neighborhood school there that's just sitting there, and the building's empty in the summer. You know, the struggle to actually go through connecting to the school district, getting the approval to where we can just open the gym so kids have somewhere to go. To me, that's the piece that we also get when you have black led, black run charters and private schools in your community because they're one directly tied to the community and there's some easier access for them to be able to build those relationships. So to not only to support the community from an economic development standpoint, but also to kind of look at curbing some of the other issues that those communities are dealing with.
Denisha, to answer your question, those who have them are those who've always had them, and those who are best positioned to get them. And in many cases, that means family who over generations has built up the capital to make investments in infrastructure and in supply lines and supply chains, and able to source things from around the world at a cheaper cost and to underbid someone else. And so where does that come? I mean, this goes back long before school boards were run by African Americans. Most African American led school systems were not that way a generation or two ago. But a lot of the the organizations and a lot of the sort of the foundations of how a lot of companies right now were created a generation ago. These are like father to son, father to daughter companies. And so this kind of gets into, again, the historical impact of racism, white supremacy in our communities that continues even to this day that we don't really reckon with. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Denisha, I want to get back to your question about Wakanda. How do we recreate that? I guess in a community, related to schools. And I look at it as basically your school, your charter school, private school, whatever, should be the anchor of the community, where it's a place where you can do after school activities, where you can do these facilities that are, well funded, well equipped. Let's say computer labs. Those labs are sitting empty once the school day ends. Why aren't those labs available for families to go in and use those computers, especially when we talk about the lack of connectivity? Well, if you have access to the school in the evening and can go into this computer lab and do everything from pay your bills to help your kids do homework, that just anchors that school to your community just a little bit more.
Yeah, I've been seeing it, so it's crazy. Even my niece, she ran into this. She said, boy was 15 years old, walking around with a bucket to clean cars and to raise money in order for him to get some internet at his house. And I was like, "Are you serious?" It was really crazy. Of course, she let him wash her car, and she gave him more than what he was asking for. But I've been seeing that all across social media, and it's like, wow, it's pitiful that kids are not able to get internet in this country, like right during this time. And it's our people who are at the end of the totem pole. They say, okay, you can learn at home. It's like, do you know all that's, at these kids' home that they may be struggling with, and then I don't know. But I was thinking about what you were just talking about, Paul. I mean, we talk about choice, privates, charters, all this stuff. Do you think are able to customize or be more in authority about who gets these grants and contracts and who's receiving the monies than the district school. I think about, because I'm thinking about my private school, like our church funded, gave money for the food, you know. Yeah, what y'all think?
I mean, I'll jump in on that one. I think when you look at, like you said, your smaller private, your smaller charter schools, they do have more ability to direct who's getting or request who's getting the money. You know, when you look at private schools, they definitely have parent groups that are very active, very vocal. You look at charter schools; a lot of charter schools are doing great work around getting parents involved more, getting parents in the door, and those parents that actually know and understand the agency they have, they are actually saying that. They're saying like, "Hey, we want to see, you know, more people from the community working directly with the school. We want to see people in the community getting contracts related to, you know, facilities, how the school is run." You get that piece when, you know, you have that black led charter or private school versus, like Curtis kind of said, you know, when you look at the larger districts, you know, that's where that generational wealth, the generational connectivity, you know, your chambers of commerce really come into play because they drive a lot of those decisions about who's, you know, going to be on that contract list, who's actually in place, who's in position to be able to, you know, have the insurance, be bonded to be able to do that work.
Well, let's say if I'm in the community and, you know, I'm either a business person or a connected parent or somebody who let's say looks at a school and that school's in the community operating. And I think this example might work easier with a private school because they have more independence with how they contract things out. And that school is looking at doing their lunch program, but they're looking at something like Sodexo or Aramark. And I'm in the community. And if I go back to the, you know, to the back in the day when the ladies, it was women managing cafeterias, running these lunchrooms, and they were doing it like a small restaurant. How can we force things like that back in the schools? You know, and the school, of course, is going to be reluctant because it's much easier to just hire a big company like Sodexo to come in and do it, as opposed to putting faith in let's say, a small business that wants to provide lunch services. So how can we convince schools to start going down that path if entrepreneurs like that emerge?
And Paul, it's funny that you brought that up. So I can actually remember seeing this growing up to where our school system, you know, had a larger contract with a Sodexo or Aramark, but the individuals that actually ran the food services in the schools, most of them were local black caterers. So change that from position to where if those schools were private school or charter schools, instead of going to this big national conglomerate, you could have hired that local black caterer that's in your building, in your kitchen already, to just run your food services.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we
And I
have
bet
people.
they love their food.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they were able to transform the regular lunch that most people got to where, like you said, it ran almost like an outside restaurant or cafeteria. People actually look forward to looking at the lunch menu, seeing what was on the menu, because you had these caterers that were connected to the community, actually the ones that were facilitating the food service contract that was going out to a national conglomerate.
Well, I mean, so food, school lunches, I'm glad you brought this up. School lunches is free money. The Department of Education, Department of Agriculture, excuse me. And then Department of Agriculture, particularly in districts like mine, we have 65% of kids who qualify for free lunch. They're just sending money down based on, you know, certain income levels. And that's not really a part of an average district's budget. You know, so either we're going to get money to pay for those who can't pay for themselves, or children like mine are just going to have to come out of pocket, and if not, you're just going to get no lunch. And so it's kind of like a pass through. Like, you know, here it is. You know, who's going to do something Now the question, to the point of, how do you do that? Some of that's going to happen at the federal level, having very, very deliberate about, minority businesses and percentage of things, like at least at the traditional public school level. At a private and charter school level, you're right. I mean, you have sort of more freedom to do so. The question is always going to be, funding and money at the margins, and whether that mom and pop in that community can serve so many students at so much money. And if it's a little bit more than what Sodexo or Aramark can do, because they're going to buy in bulk, they're going to ship everything, they're going to be able to do it in whole, cheaper, whether you're willing to sort of take, accept that cost, or to say, you know what, there's so much more in this, meaning we're going to have our students go work at these companies, intern there. We're going to have students who are going to grow our own goods. Yeah. Other thing that I think are more important that money really can't buy is the fact that, the number of percentage of black farmers in this country is almost none. The percentage of people who can, someone mentioned earlier, talking to who was I talking to? Might have been Howard Fuller or somebody. And they were like, yeah, man, all these black folks talking about, separating and doing, going to war. I said, he said, well, we don't grow our own food. Like, we can't, if you don't grow your own food, you can't go to war with nobody. Because food supply get cut down and we all messed up. And so I know someone's got a little neighborhood garden, some of us can grow, little, cucumbers in the backyard. But we have to get back to that. And in many ways, partnering with these local organizations, that a lot of schools that have more independence in how they contract can build up again this economy of education, which is not only do you help support one caterer, maybe they help develop and open up a new caterer, or they expand, or they hire more people, or they create internships, or they, buy a farm. I mean, there's a lot of other things that I hope that those education journalists can kind of like just expand the conversation, because when you talk to people in our community in that way, it opens up their mind, education beyond pencils, pens, book bags, and IEPs. It's like, oh, well, I never thought about it. I have a friend who's trying to open up with a caterer. She's trying to, quit her day job and become a full-time caterer. Are you telling me that there's a chance that she could get a contract, feeding kids every day? She's feeding kids three times a day for 180 days. If she can't make that work, then nobody can. But does she have the capacity to get everything she needs to feed 500, 600 kids 3 times a day? And there is no plan B. You can't come in tomorrow and say, I don't have the food for lunch tomorrow, and give it to a day. There's no like 99% ain't gonna do. And a lot of us, have to get to the point where, we're at that space. It's gonna take some grace from some people to sort of say, I'll work with you, maybe I'll work with 2 contractors now, and you'll do kind of move you in slowly but surely. But a lot of times us moving in the direction of change takes a lot of courage and a lot of grace for those who just need to get into a better space for us.
Yeah. Kevin,
it's battling the economies of scale, which, that's the big advantage that the Sodexos of the world have. When we're talking about the lunch thing, is they do this on a huge scale. So how can you reduce that to one school or 2 or 3 schools and be able to do that and be competitive?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it comes to.
Go ahead, man.
I think a lot of it comes down to the intentionality of planning to say, here's how we want to impact our community. It's easier for that smaller network, that smaller individual school to be intentional of saying, hey, we want to connect with the community. We want to empower, those vendors that look like us, that are around us. So while we understand, the economy of scales can get things a little bit cheaper, we may have to pay a little bit more and figure out how we can build some deeper connections, some deeper relationships to be able to make sure that we're connecting to, whether it's a caterer, whether it's a local janitorial service, connecting back to those contractors and those organizations, directly in that community.
But Emory, guess who knows the value of our community? Sodexo. Why? Recently, Sodexo partnered with who? Magic Johnson. Sodexo partnered with Magic Johnson and created a separate entity called Magic Sodexo. Magic Johnson's goal, and I don't know Magic personally, but I know some people who work with him. Their goal is to sort of convince members of school boards like myself and others to work with them. At the same time, they're making inroads in HBCUs. Just got a contract with, I think, Central State about a year ago to get their food contract. And these groups, and Sodexo will tell you, we just don't do food. We do janitorial. We'll do landscaping. And so they come in under the auspices of that. But again, they're saying there's power in these HBCUs. There's power in these predominantly Black school districts. There's power in Black private schools and probably Black, and these Black charter school networks that we have to go about it differently. And let's get the most recognized name and respected face in the Black community, other than in business and in many ways, Magic Johnson. Magic said, I'm going to, I believe in it so much. I'm going to add my brand to this. And he's gone off and done that. Now, guess what happened? I knew that Magic Johnson was trying to get that Central State contract. About around the same time, the news comes out that, guess what? Magic Johnson donates $1 million to Central State University. I said, he donated $1 million to Central State scholarship?
Because he's going to get $4 or $5 billion back.
Likes, tweets, retweets. Oh, Magic Johnson, philanthropist. Da, 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 da. No one talked about the food contract. And so, again, there are people in probably in Central Ohio who could have done that for Central State. There are a lot of probably smaller businesses who could have done that. There's ways that they could have created their own program. And again, they're trying to say everyone is trying to operate, with reduced resources. But bigger picture says, how are you creating entrepreneurship? How are you supporting the economy? And we all love magic, but these companies see our value, and they said, if we don't do something rather aggressive, we're going to lose out on a growing population and a stream of income that is unstoppable, and that's going to keep coming, whether it be through Title I programs, through the Department of Agriculture, through all the different programs at the federal and state level that will be here long after the four of us are gone.
Yep.
Kevin Chavis, he has this book series, and I'm such a conspiracy theorist, and it's talking about the food industry contracts for the food lunch contracts for kids in DC, and how it was a major company like Sodexo, and they were giving money. They were giving these funds to the Sodexos, I guess, of Washington, D.C., and they were poisoning the food in Black neighborhoods. So all the districts that had a high percentage of Black students, they were poisoning the food to try to kill all kids out. It was a very conspiracy theorist type of book, but it talks exactly about the food service contracts and who's receiving the monies and who has the best interest at heart for our Black kids. I would definitely recommend his book, Kevin Chavis, and he's a prolific advocate for school choice. And that series was very entertaining, very interesting.
I mean, before we move on, we're in a world of conspiracy theory. I just don't want to, miss this opportunity that we have to be, evidence-based and fact-based in anything we do. I've not read his book. And I just want to make sure that, we have enough facts on our side that we don't really have to use a lot of that stuff in order to really make the case. And when you do that, you get people who in many ways were on your side to begin with, give them a reason to be skeptical about stuff you do. And those who are already against you to just say, see, I told you. Again, we have way too much data. We have way too much evidence on the surface to make our case. And it's too much history. Again, I'm more right now, the data. I mean, I've been talking data for the last 10 years, and a lot of people it just has not sunk in. And so now I said, let me just try another avenue, which is the history. And what the history is there, and what Paul and Emory and you are doing in our community. And the more we talk about our history, I think that's more than enough evidence to make the case for us investing in ourselves and betting on ourselves, in as opposed to a lot of these conspiracy theories that are out there.
So let's go around the horn. Any last words? Any last things to leave with people? Why Black minds matter? Why contracts with Blacks matter? Let's go around the horn.
I mean, I'll kick it off and kind of reiterate what I've been saying. To me, if you truly want to see economic empowerment, our communities in a better place, we have to control the education of our children. And the one way of doing that is through more black-led charters, more black-led, private schools, and policies in place that allow the dollars to actually follow the students. So those schools aren't fighting from behind the eight ball from the onset. That intentionality that those individual school leaders can have about trying to connect to the community is just so important, because that's where we can learn our history. That's where we can learn about the Rosenwald schools. Curtis and I did a conversation a couple months ago with about 80 HBCU school leaders, and none of them had ever heard about the Rosenwald schools. They didn't know that history of us, being black school leaders. We know how HBCU colleges were founded, but most of us never knew that there was also a K through 12 component that really supported a lot of those HBCUs. So if we truly want to be in that place to where we can truly determine the outcome of our communities, we got to look at supporting those policies and supporting the founding of black-led, black-ran charter and private schools.
Well, I'll say, I think Black Minds Matter is again a part of a history. Reminds me a lot of the term "mind is a terrible thing to waste," which is the model of United Negro College Fund, and it's sort of a 2.0. I was reading. I told you last night I was reading the history of UNCF, and there is a reason why they didn't use the word black in that. They're really trying to appeal to many ways white philanthropists in the community that they were really trying to raise money from. But I'm glad that you and others have been a little more intentional about putting that out there. At the same time, we always knew Black Minds Matter. We always knew that a black mind was a terrible thing to waste. We didn't need convincing. In a lot of ways, we were trying to proclaim to the world what we already knew. But in many ways, I think work that I'm trying to do historically is to really reinvigorate our own community, to understand our own wealth, so that we can, again, invest in ourselves, whether it be in our own school leaders, our own entrepreneurs, and our own communities. I'm really glad to be a part of this conversation. I'm looking forward to what comes next.
And since we've talked so much about economics during this past hour, I want to leave the thought about keep your eye on opportunities related to COVID-19 in schools, and specifically learning pods. That is emerging as a big opportunity, and it's a way where you can get involved with education. It's, I think, a good opportunity for retired educators, and you'll be able to work directly in your community, setting up these pods and making some money.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for that. And there are, like Paul just mentioned, there's funding from the federal government to start up, to continue some of the things that's been happening and for education. And so I would definitely also tito off of what Paul just said, encourage everyone to look into funding, not just from the local and state, but from the federal government. I know when I worked at the Department of Education with Secretary DeVos, one of the number one initiatives was to try to figure out why are the same organizations receiving the grants every single year. And so definitely look into grants. One of the great things that happened was opening up more communications around the grants that are available. And so, yeah, thank you guys so much for joining. This was an amazing episode of Black Minds Matter, and I look forward to collaborating with you guys again.